We see this in Britain in politics, where members of the House of Commons are now lower even than estate agents and lower than the press, who are usually the lowest of the low. And to get below the press and estate agents is really some achievement. Luckily, in the House of Lords, unelected, as you know, nominated and appointed by Her Majesty the Queen, we have a much higher status in the eyes of the electorate, not because of our titles, and my name is 19 words long, so that's a bit of a mouthful, not because of our titles, but because, curiously enough, 9 times out of 10, we seem to be closer to public opinion. We seem to be closer to the needs of the electorate. Perhaps because we stand back, we don't have constituencies, we can therefore read a lot, talk a lot, learn a lot, and then make a decision. And because we're there for life, we are more free of the whipping system than might otherwise be the case. As my chief whip would tell you, because he's hounding me with messages. Luckily, he doesn't know how far I've gone, because he keeps saying, come back, we've got a 3-line whip on tonight. So we're a bit freer in the House of Lords, and that has given a greater respect for us by the electorate. As a comment on the side, although a nominated cluster of people as a political chamber is not the common formula, where election is everything, do remember that in the Greek system, there was for quite a while a small nominated chamber. I will say, if I remember correctly, they didn't have a lifelong tenure as we do. I think they had 15 years, but nonetheless, there was a sort of council of elders in Greek democracy, and maybe that's what we've followed. You know that in the British Parliament, we once had a uni-chamber, and we gave it up after about 150 years at about 1300, and that was a very interesting chamber because it contained a bit of everything. And in a way, that's quite a nice way of doing it. A bit of nominated and a bit of non-nominated, a bit of the rich, a bit of the mayors, a bit of everything, and that must have been quite fun. But you know, the one good strength of nomination is that you can have every single background, every single ethnic minority, every single faith, everything able-bodied, disabled-bodied, everything. And that is the strength of nomination, because of course election, always it is the bullying majority that wins, whatever that majority in that electorate may be. So don't discard the idea of nominations. In some ways, it's a very helpful trick. So the European Parliament, its weak spot, is this very, very small number of people to be elected. But it is a very powerful tool to promote democracy, the fundamental freedoms, the rule of law, the fight against corruption, free trade, the private sector, the separation of powers, which I suspect is going to be one of the most important issues in the years ahead with the coming storm, where the separation of powers is not a philosophy that is adopted by at least one of the world's main religions. Separation of powers is somehow alien if you think that God is in charge of absolutely mind, body, and soul. And Sharia law, for example, 43% of Muslims in America believe that Sharia law, according to the latest Pew poll, should take over from the American Constitution because it would be better. And if you profoundly believe that, and some other faiths do as well, I could name several of them, that religious law basically should take control, then of course separation of powers is really the hinge at which we crack and where we have this difficulty. And the European Parliament certainly stands for that. It also, in a sense, reflects the impermeable barrier against dictatorship, which I see Europe as standing for, standing proud against dictatorship. I've always felt this wonderful phrase, Europe of the regions, is the one that I feel most comfortable with, rather than Europe of the nation states. So the European Parliament has tremendous potential for good and for great strengths. And with soft power tool availability, certainly in the Affaires étrangères and the Common Defence and Security Policy work and human rights, we found a number of very good tools which the Commission had built up, for example, or which we built up ourselves, which enabled us to spread soft power. It enabled us to float more democratic ideals in a very gentle way. One of the most important and powerful tools, of course, is partnership and association agreements. When I did the report, which was a very difficult one indeed, on Kashmir for the European Parliament, the difference in the partnership and association agreements with India and with Pakistan reflected absolutely not just the existing closeness, but the coming future closeness. Now, India, the biggest democracy in the globe, of course, with all of the difficulties that massive population offers, nonetheless, thanks to the Commission particularly, gently, carefully and calmly, this wonderful fourth generation a partnership and association agreement had been built up, and it enabled us from Parliament to work far more closely with India than perhaps we managed with a much less partnership, less quality partnership and association agreement with Pakistan. The neighbourhood policy of the Parliament of the Council of Europe gives another example of how Europe can work at its best. Nowhere else in the world, other than in Strasbourg, Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, I believe, can you find Israel and Palestine together in the same plenary, speaking side by side and not having a fight. Nobody has to cut off the microphones when they're speaking in the Council of Europe. There they are, they're actual members, because they are in the neighbourhood policy, sitting in committees, sitting in plenary, participating in every possible way that they wish to do, and side by side in the same chamber. I challenge you to find any other venue in the whole globe where you will find India and Pakistan, where you will find Israel and Palestine behaving like that. It is an astonishing phenomenon, and that is the best of Europe for you. On top of that, of course, I often wonder about the geography in the European world. I mean, in PARC, for example, in the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, even I think the Canadians wonder why the neighbourhood policy, which is meant to be contiguous states, maybe the sea doesn't count, because they're also a part of the neighbourhood policy. It's great fun seeing them there, but they sit at the back feeling slightly awkward, because really it doesn't quite fit. Nor Morocco, which seems to be coming in as well, and possibly Lebanon, that's a little bit closer. But it is quite fun, the neighbourhood policy. And that, I think, is the way in which there can be a closeness without necessarily people having to join. Then in the European Parliament, we also had rapporteurships, and that's a novelty for somebody coming from Britain. I was first of all given the task of writing a report on Iraq. Can you think of any more contentious issue in 1999 and 2000 than writing a big report on Iraq to shape the common foreign policy of the committee? It took about 18 months because it was thrown back so often, torn to shreds and discarded, and I kept on having to begin again. But eventually we got something through. And from that, I was able to build and chair the first ever, and it still continues, joint committee between the Iraqi Parliament and the Parliament of Brussels. And that was really good. We started to get to know them, and that gave us the opportunity to bring a little bit more democracy in that might otherwise have been the case.